Okay, well, welcome everybody. I was asked to give this presentation on work-life balance. I wonder who recommended me.
Aiden Steinbach recommended you.
Aiden Steinbach. Okay, that makes sense. It's funny because there's a point in here where I'm going to use him as an example.
Oh, really? Take a little picture of him.
So work-life balance, first, a little dirty secret, work-life balance, it doesn't exist. So it's a flawed concept. Anyone want to guess why? No way to perfect it?
Yeah.
No way, okay, Tyler says no way to perfect it. Oh, I'm sorry, your name?
Shreya. Shreya.
Shreya, okay. Do you have a guess, Shreya?
Because it's unpredictable what might happen next.
Okay, it's unpredictable.
Like going off that, you can try to like plan it with like a schedule, but there'll be days when some things run longer than others, and work takes up more time than you want it to.
That's fair. Last night, my son just kept waking up, and then he just comes and jumps in my bed and kicks me all night.
Yeah,
Just trying to.
it's absolutely brutal.
Yeah. And so, yeah, not like in a mean way. He's just trying to get comfortable.
Yeah, I get it.
So, here's what's wrong with the work-life frame. We don't have a separate work and life. The whole thing is just our life. Your life right now, it's happening every second, regardless of what you're doing. The specific second, life is happening. You're eating, sleeping, studying, it's happening. So, let's talk about life design using design thinking as kind of an alternative frame. So here we're going to use design thinking methods to kind of prioritize and understand essentially how we want to approach things, maybe our education, our career, our social ties, our ambitions, our purpose. With that, now we're looking at, it's not our work and life, the balance, it's about managing your work and your life. And so I want you to think about this for a second. Essentially what we're going to cover is a set of perspectives, some priorities, time management, relationships, money management, and last but not least, because all the other stuff, if you get this right, the other stuff really falls into place. Hey, how's it going?
Good. Straight truck.
So we'll look at business last. So the perspective. I want you to look at these different concepts and really think about how it affects your life. So first is the growth mindset, how it affects your failure and success. And I want you to start with the idea, essentially like failure is the first step to success. Just deal with it, right? It's just there. Your chances are you're not going to die, right? So what are you going to do after that failure? How are you going to bounce back from it and learn? And so with a growth mindset, you're looking at this as an opportunity to learn. Every time you fail, it's something to learn something new. With a fixed mindset, you're essentially saying, you know, this is a judgment on me, and woe is me, I can't do anything about it. And so there are a bunch of different psychological concepts that we'll look at that tackle this from different perspectives that overall, I believe, gives you a very holistic view of how you can be proactive in designing things to help you in the long run. So one is first the locus of control, self-regulation, that affects your stressors, your lifespan, and we'll talk about the Matthew effect. So first with the locus of control, this refers to essentially how you view things as an individual, and what sense of agency you have in life. With an internal locus of control, you say, look what I can do. Essentially, I can change the things that happen to me. If something negative happens to me, I can take that as feedback and improve upon it. Or perhaps it's the way I reacted that changes the way things happen. With an external locus of control, it's the idea like things are happening to me and I can't do anything about it. It's kind of like that fixed mindset. Essentially, why bother? Why does everything happen to me? There's nothing I can do. It's all based on luck and external forces acting upon me. Things happen to me instead of I enact things that happen. With that said, The internal locus of control is that you believe things happen and you can influence them. Not working. 1 second. With a person with the external locus of control, you feel like other forces, random chance, environmental factors, they affect what happens. So this is one of my favorite concepts, and this builds on the idea of a growth mindset, builds on the idea of an internal locus of control. It bridges it out to motivation, essentially a promotion versus a prevention focus. And so if you can see in the graphic here, the difference is with the promotion focus, we're focused on hitting the target. So we're promoting hitting the target. With the prevention focus, we're avoiding misses. And so think about it this way. We're trying to avoid anything negative that would happen to us versus let's just hit the target. And so research in psychology tells us that these are good for different things. Those who play to win or hit the target have a promotion focus. Those who play not to lose have a prevention focus. Now, in life or death situations, the prevention focus probably will benefit you. But in other chances where you're essentially, you're playing to win, you're trying to hit the target, what we find from research on people who adopt this promotion focus, and it's not something that's, fixed. It's something that you can hone and develop. That not only do they hit the target, they hit it faster, they learn and improve quicker because of the iterative times where, they're playing to win. So each time they're cycling back and getting more feedback. And overall, that leads them to being more knowledgeable, typically happier with the results. But again, there are benefits to having a prevention focus, and it depends on the context. But if we're talking about entrepreneurship, work-life balance, you have this big goal that you're trying to tackle. This can be very beneficial. The idea that you should try to hit the target and learn from it. So one thing to remember is essentially timing is everything. And you guys, so show of hands, ages, 18, okay, 19, okay, 20, oh, that's a great number, okay, 21, okay, 50,
Over 21.
okay. So, first of all, by the age of 20, I want you to have this perspective about why you design your life, why you have work-life balance in the traditional sense. This came from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. It's the American Time Use Survey. And the way it's depicted here, this was developed, the depiction was graphed by Grover Colby on Instagram. He does some pretty cool productivity stuff. And I like the way that he represented it here, so I've kind of stole that. But essentially, by the age of 20, you'll have used up your time with your family. So your parents, if you have brothers or sisters, so those of you in the back row that said you're 20, the majority of that time is now behind you. So here's where we're going to get a little bit depressing, and this is the implication here. After age 30, the time you spend alone will gradually increase until you die. Wah, wah, but we can see the hours per day that you spend alone will gradually increase. A huge amount of your time in adult life will be spent with people that you work with, your coworkers. So it's good to have great coworkers like Dr. Hayward here. Around age 30, your number of close friends and the amount of time you spend with them will decrease. So I'm 33, going on 34 in about 3 weeks. I can attest to that. Think slowly but surely. And this is where it jumps in. So we talked about your family of origin, your parents, your siblings, how that's now, for the most of you, behind you in terms of the majority of your time with them in your life. This is where it uptakes. So the time you spend with your partner will increase until the day that one of you dies. So, whatever that age is, and if you choose to have children, you will spend a huge part of your life with them between the ages of approximately, given the average of the survey, and this is the American Time Use Survey, that you'll spend around the ages 25 to 50. And we were just talking in your office earlier today that this seems to hold true, right?
Sure.
So here's where it all comes together. The idea is that you can impact change. So the implications that we just saw about the time use, we know that our times with our partners will matter, so choose the right partner. If you have not done so, put some effort into that, think about it. The decision you have, whether you will have kids, will make a big difference in your life. So it's important to take that job seriously. And the point of being a parent, for most people, is not to have a cute little baby, right? Because the cute little baby grows up. It's to raise a functioning, well-adjusted adult. And so one way that you can actually see this play out is what we would call the Matthew effect. And this was originally proposed by sociologist Robert Merton. He made the argument that essentially it's the tendency of individuals to accrue social and economic success. So it's the idea that you accumulate advantage. So as an example, you put the effort in. Let's say because of the time that you've put into whatever your craft you're honing, you put the effort in, you put the years in, you do the deliberate practice, so you learn a craft, you spend thousands of hours developing it so that you can be better than the average Joe at doing this. And essentially what that means is you begin to develop accumulated advantage. So for instance, if you choose a career like this where you go get your PhD, that is something that takes a huge time investment, but they show statistically that it pays over time, usually 6 figures. And so if you do it earlier, you potentially can have time economies from that. Or if you do it later, there's still benefits there. But an example essentially is you accumulate advantage, and what they found is essentially Merton used this to describe how scientists, he studied, I'll explain the thinking behind the Matthew effect in a second, but he looked at this and said, so-and-so gets a disproportionate amount of influence. When people are talking about research, they say, I'll give an example from my own personal life. My dissertation advisor, he is ranked the #1 in family business research productivity and quality, and number 13 in research productivity and quality for entrepreneurship research. So I was presenting a paper that I basically wrote by myself, and put my dissertation chairs as a stamp of approval to submit to a conference. I was talking to some people. I've got this paper on social-emotional selectivity theory. Oh yeah, I saw something about Kellerman's is doing that. I was like, yeah, that's my paper. But essentially, what that shows is that reputational effect that we're talking about accumulated advantage, is that you accrue advantage over time. In this example, the scholars that are well known, essentially they get put on projects to help guide it through to a successful publication, and then it no longer becomes, even though I'm first author, Jung et al., it becomes the Kellerman's paper, right? And so this is something that Merton developed a keen understanding for, and so credit will usually be given to researchers who are already famous. Same goes to any other type of field. So we're going to look at some of the implications and look at the downsides and the upsides and how you can use it to your advantage. To essentially, if we're talking about that life balance, where essentially that accumulated advantage will work for you, and then you have this responsibility essentially, what should you do with that accumulated advantage, and how should you be a steward of it? So let's talk about essentially where this came from. So Merton came up with the idea by reading the Bible. Now I'm not going to sit here and preach to you. I just want to give you some background about how this idea came up. So the parable of the talents is in the book of Matthew in the New Testament, chapter 25. And so that's where the idea of the Matthew effect and the name comes from. Essentially, the story, the parable goes like this. A master puts his servants in charge of some money, some talents, which is a form of currency at the time. And so while he's away on a trip, and he says to the servants, he gives them money according to their own abilities. One servant gets 5 talents because that person is probably more capable, and the next person gets 2 talents because they're a little bit less capable, but still more capable than the third one. The last servant gets 1 talent. And so essentially, let's put this into effect. There's a big psychological endowment effect here that people often miss. If we go back to ancient times, essentially, as a unit of currency, a talent is worth about 6,000 denarii. And a denarius was usually a payment for a day's labor. So 1 denarius per day, a single talent, was therefore 20 years of labor. When you assume a 6-day work week, because obviously in the Hebrew Jewish sense, which is where the parable is framed, they're not working on the Sabbath. And so 20 years of work is essentially in 1 talent. And so the moral of the story essentially is that, at least the way it's framed in the book of Matthew, is that the 2 servants that were given more doubled their talents, and therefore they are rewarded by their master. Essentially, they're told that they will reap more benefits, whereas the servant that was given 1 talent, he fears losing it and goes and buries it in the sand. And then from that fear of losing it, the master obviously has entrusted these people to grow his money, and he is mad and punishes them. And there is a line in here that essentially becomes what a lot of people associate with the Matthew effect. They take therefore the talent from him and give it unto him which hath 10 talents. For unto everyone that hath shall be given, and he who has abundance. But for him that hath not shall be taken away. So essentially, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, which is the punishment in the story. And so Merton takes that and he says, with that reputational effect, with my example about scholars, essentially, if you continue to publish and you're on that paper, you will get that reputational effect, whereas the person who is the low totem pole, who isn't recognized, will have a comparative disadvantage. And so there's a double-sided point here, right? So you can use this to your advantage, essentially. How do you accumulate advantage? But Merton's making a great point. Essentially, what is the downside? Because it comes perhaps at a cost for some other people. And so one of the things we'll talk about today, essentially, with work-life balance, is essentially that you are embedded with other people in social networks. And so make those social networks matter. Those relationships that you have with people should mean something. So I want you to consider your priorities. So with this, let's look at our priorities. We'll pay attention to our vows. We'll look at the Eisenhower matrix, the Pareto principle, and then when to say yes and when to say no. So it's a good idea to start out with essentially knowing what values guide you, so we can innately just do something because we're just going through the motions. But if we think about it, our actions should be built on whatever beliefs and values are invisible behind what people see us do. And so that work-life balance essentially comes down to, if you want that, if you want more life and less work, you have to pay attention to the vows. And so the vows are essentially activities. What are the focal people doing in your life? If you're looking around in your day-to-day life, who are you spending it with? What are they doing? What is the implication here? What are you accomplishing when you spend time with these people? In the environments, where is this happening? Is it happening at school? Is it happening, at your apartment? Is it happening, at a party? All these things matter because the setting, it can make you feel good, it can make you feel bad. I want you to start thinking about these things and saying, where can I pay attention to these things so that if I want more life out of what I'm doing, I'm prioritizing the things that matter. And so that first revolves around, paying attention. The interactions. How are you engaging with people? What is the interaction with one another? How are they coming into effect? Where is it happening? With the objects, what's happening? What items are being used in this experience? For instance, if it's on a road trip, whose car are we taking? If it's at a party, what do I have in my hand? What am I eating? What does that contribute to the experience that I'm having with people? Is it a bad effect, or is it a good effect? And so once you start paying attention to all of these different vow-related things, the users. So essentially, this is designed for design thinking, but we can apply it to our life. Who is participating in this experience? Is it Sam and Jimmy, or is it Tyler and Lexi? And so that matters as well. So here's where it gets to be really interesting, and I'm glad Elisa's not here because she kind of how do I put this? She disciplined me for mentioning a lot of saying that you should say no to freshmen. So we've already established that the majority of you are not freshmen, and Ian was already in that conversation, so you're already damaged goods. I've already negatively affected you. So Eisenhower, obviously 5-star general in World War II, becomes president. He becomes famous for a whole lot of things, but he steals this quote that he got secondhand from a university president, and he makes it in a speech in 1954. And he says, "I have two kinds of problems, the urgent and the important. The urgent are not important, the important are never urgent." And from that, we have perhaps one of my favorite matrices is the Eisenhower matrix. Essentially, you're dividing everything you do in life. Let's say if you were to plan out the rest of your week, if you were to systematically write down what that entails, whether that's watching Netflix, whether that's going to visit Duke at his house, whether that's writing a paper, because we all know it's end of semester, and we have pressing priorities, right? So we have the important and urgent stuff. So we divide it in terms of urgency and not urgent, important and not important. So the real takeaway here is we often focus on the things that are important and urgent, rightfully so. But that's often being reactive. So if you want to have that life and your work-life balance, essentially you have to make time for things. And so here's the counterintuitive part. You need to prioritize far more than at least these two. So if you're focusing on the things that are urgent and important, you need to do it, obviously. but make just as much time, or perhaps even more time, to focus on the things that are not urgent, but still important. Because we saw with those life graphs, the lifespan graphs, essentially we know how things play out from now on. And so whether you're trying to build a skill set, you want to make sure that you have the time in the future to get there. So if you're always being reactive, doing things that are urgent and important, that's great that you're getting some important thing stuff, but you're not making enough time to do things that pay off in the future. So you have to prioritize that as well. And here's another little thing that most people don't stop to think about. It's often urgent because someone else told you it was. And so you're often playing by someone else's timeline. And so, again, if you're a freshman, disregard what I'm saying because you have, your whole college experience ahead of you. But essentially, you can let something slip and life will go on. And so your job is to prioritize essentially what you are, what is important to you, because we can't do everything that is thrown at us. So with that being said, focus on the important and the urgent stuff, but always remember you need to carve out time for the stuff that is not urgent, but still increasingly important. Because that's where your future, the preparation for your future is where you carve that time out. And so here's where it becomes increasingly even more, like reading in between the lines and saying, this is where you're gaming the system. Essentially is that the Pareto principle is the argument. So Pareto, 18th century Italy, he comes up to the realization that 80% of Italy's land is owned by 20% of its citizens. And over time, we've come to know that as Pareto principle, we've applied it to productivity, where essentially, for the most part, you can look at it and say that about 20% of your causes will lead to 80% of your effect. And the inverse is true. So that about 80% of the time you spend on something will be finishing up that extra 20% that, that 20% of the causes didn't get in that 80%. So with that being said, you now know you have your guardrails, your priorities, you know what's important to you, you know that you need to prioritize the things that are not urgent but still important, and you know that essentially for everything on that Eisenhower matrix, essentially that 80% of the outcome will come from 20% of what you do. So you can essentially start to say, how will I play with this to figure out where will I get the farthest, the quickest, based on what is that 20% that will allow me to accomplish my priorities and the things that are urgent for other people that lead to that 80% outcome, and then do I necessarily need all of that extra 20% that takes up 80% of my time? And this applies in the product you move to. For instance, in my family business, we do 7 figures in revenue annually, but I'd say about 80% of that comes from about 20% of the products. And we have a very large product line. And so that other, 80%, the long tail of the distribution, only accounts for about 20% of what we sell. But we have it there because it still encourages sales with some people. So this is boundaries, when to say yes and when to say no is really important. So when to say yes, when it's important to you. So we've got that out of the way, right? The issue is that how many of you would consider yourself a people pleaser? Okay, yeah, I'm right there with you, our reformed people pleaser. Essentially, here's the issue. You like people, you want to help people out, and so you say yes. You continue to say yes. Yes, yes, yes. Eventually you get to the point where you say yes, but you don't mean it. And when you say yes and you don't mean it, there's essentially a couple things that can happen. One, you start to resent the person that you said yes to because you're now doing something that you don't want to do, but you agreed to it. And the other flip side is also true. That person can start to resent you because they know you're not putting your work in that they would hope that you would be doing, because it might show through that you are not putting your 100% in. And so when you say yes to something and you don't mean it, you're essentially building resentment either in yourself or in other people, and that can be a problem. So when you say yes, mean yes, and when you say no, mean no. And if we're talking about that work-life balance, you free up so much time when you say no to things that don't matter. But that doesn't mean that you don't value those people, because I'm going to show you different ways that you can say no and still show that you value those people. So essentially, I just put up here 20 ways to say no, and there's a lot more. So vague but effective, thank you for asking, but it's going to work for me right now. Gratitude, thank you so much. I love the enthusiasm and support, but I'm sorry I can't do that at this time. Keep trying. So none of those times work for me right now, but maybe you can propose something. And essentially, some of these, you're starting to push the request back. And I'm sure those of you who have worked internships or your job outside of here at school, some people come to you essentially because they want you to solve their problems. And so they want to workshop and solve problems with you, and essentially that can burn up some time. So one way that you can do that is say, ask me later, or that time's not going to work for me. If someone comes to you with a request, say, I would love to help you, but I'm going to need this from you first. And that puts the onus on them. So now they're not throwing a request at you. You're now throwing it back at them and saying that you have the responsibility to do this. And so when you show some effort, then I will help you, right? So if you start to think through all these different ways, how can I free up time? How can I say no but still show people that I value them? I value what you're doing, but I'm going to need a little bit more information. Or, and I do this a lot because I have a lot of competing demands. And one of them is I'm on editorial boards, and when I get offers to review for papers that I'm not on the editorial board for and are kind of journals I've never heard of, I know people who want to review for journals, and obviously these people reach out to me to review because they think I have expertise. I know people in the field who have expertise but haven't been given a chance, so I'll reach out to these people and I'll say, hey, such and such journal wanted to review. I'd like to recommend to you, would you be willing to do this? And usually they'll jump at it because that can be an opportunity to advance in the field. And so it's a win-win for everyone. I'm off the hook. I don't have to review for this journal. They're getting a chance to redo it, and the editor is happy because they don't have to go to someone else. And so when you start to think about how you can use your no's to solve problems for people, then you can really see how you get your life back, because people aren't coming to you with their problems, or when they do, you have a solution that you can quickly deflect and give them. And you're freeing up time to do the things that you want to do, those things that bring you joy, happiness, or that you feel that are important, that lead to something in the future. So now we've talked about priorities. Let's put them into practice. We talked about the Pareto principle, how you can divide it up. Essentially 20% of what you do will lead to 80% of the outcomes. Now let's divide up our time so we can kind of make sense of how we use it. So with dividing our time, How many hours are there in a week? Anyone know? Someone doing math in their head.
168.
168. Thank you. There are 168 hours in a week. So how can we divide that into our days? So psychologists have looked at this, and a good way to think about is the 888 rule. So essentially, we know that a good night's rest is typically 8 hours. I don't know what that's like sometimes, but I know that essentially it's a good metric to keep a frame, because if we're talking about that work-life balance, it's really life-work balance, right? So that I have my life and work somehow fits into that. And so you need to limit your work to essentially that 8 hours. And so if we were to add that up, what that ends up becoming, we'll get to that in a second. But expert psychologists advise that getting to the right balance of sleep, leisure, and work is the key to improving your self-esteem and productivity all around. And so this 8-8 rule, essentially your me time, your work, and your sleep, it's a good metric to look at things. So what does that mean when entrepreneurs who control what they do for their work, how does that add up? Because if we're saying you should be 56 hours for your work every week and you're your own boss, you could easily fall into this trap where, as an entrepreneur, you'll say 56 hours plus 56 hours, yes, that is 112 hours to follow my passion. And essentially, I'm going to give you an unpopular opinion alert. When people tell you to follow your passion, it's generally bad advice. And let me explain why. Because there's really a second part that you need to evaluate. There are two types of passion. There's the harmonious passion. You participate in something because it brings you joy. You can stop it, and eventually you can stop it and still feel that contentment. Whereas there's the one that we often see a lot of entrepreneurs have, which is obsessive passion. And a lot of people, when they say follow your passion, or they're told to follow their passion, they might, especially if you're your own boss, they might follow that road of the obsessive passion. And with the obsessive passion, in contrast to the harmonious passion, that's where you don't like it for the sake of liking it. You like the outcomes. You don't like the process. You feel like an obligation, perhaps to your customers. You do not control your work controls you. And so you can apply this to, how many of you play Xbox, Nintendo Switch, any? You play a game and eventually like you lose, so you start over and keep going, and then somehow it's like 8 a.m. and you started at 8 p.m.
Not for a while, no, I haven't done
Sam
it.
knows what Sam's been
I've
there.
been there before. During COVID, trust me, it was boring.
It was boring. Okay,
Yeah.
so that's an example of that obsessive passion. I'm gonna continue, and I'm gonna continue, and I'm gonna continue. And whereas a harmonious would be like, oh well, I tried, I failed, it was fun while it lasted. I'm just gonna stop, close up shop, and go to sleep. So, that's not to say that obsessive passion isn't important, but a lot of people get into entrepreneurship thinking that they're going to have a harmonious passion, and it's the flip side. And we know that statistically a lot of businesses fail. And if you're grinding it out, you're being obsessively passionate about something, it can lead to some negative health outcomes. And so knowing that ahead of time, you can be at least more aware of it, and you can perhaps control for it, and adjust accordingly. So you can also manage your time according to energy. So we're going to get into some different ways that you can approach time management. We talked about the 888 rule. Now let's look at how you manage your energy. While time is a finite resource, energy works very differently. Energy is a renewable resource, but only up to a certain point. And because of that, scheduling every minute of your free time to increase productivity may seem like a good use of your time, but it's pretty bad, right? So it doesn't account for the need that you need to replenish energy. And so we were talking about, Aiden was in my entrepreneurship class, and we were talking about some of the things that were coming up, and I was like, here are your different options. He turns his computer around at me. He shows me his color-coded schedule, blocked from like the beginning of the day to the end. It's like, where do I fit this in? And I was like, well, Aiden, you have to make choices, right? And I think I've talked to him just recently. I think he's come around to that. But it's very interesting to see, like, when we think that we need to increase our productivity by filling our time, that's just making ourselves more busy. And if we're talking about that quality of life, you need to kind of like reduce the time you spend on stuff. Learn to automate things, learn to scale and leverage things so that the amount of effort you put in essentially gets you huge payouts. And if you're an entrepreneur and you're charging by the hour, there's an implication here. Don't do that. Do not charge by the hour. You're essentially trading your time for your money. Charge by the outcome, or charge by a percentage of the effect that it has for the entrepreneur that, or the business owner that you're serving. But what we know from that, essentially, you spend a ton of energy developing a skill. So what used to take me, 7 days to review a paper, going on that reviewer example, it now takes me about 3 hours. And so if I were to get paid for this, essentially, if it was by the hour, I would be losing a lot of money, whereas the quality of my reviews have gone up exponentially. So you're kind of discounting yourself. If you're paying for by the hour, make sure that you can actually produce an outcome and get paid for the outcome, or a number of things. Like there are different ways that you can approach that. So managing according to energy, some tasks also require more energy than others. High energy tasks can't be done productively when energy is already eaten up. So because of that, over time, a lack of energy can cause a dip in productivity. And so it's a reminder, like if you want that balance, to make sure that you have that time to spend with your friends, spend with your family, do the things that matter to you, whether that's, going golfing, or, just playing with the kids, or, playing a game, or Monopoly, whatever it is. So another thing to remember is while your IQ is fixed, your problem-solving ability is not, and that changes based on your energy levels. Problem-solving is often a function of your preparedness, and so if you're paying attention, like we were talking about those valves, to the activities, the users, the objects, the interactions, then you'll start to realize where you can start to solve problems the most effectively. And so one key aspect of preparedness is knowing when to do what type of work, and when to do it. And with that, here everyone has an Einstein window. And what is that? It's essentially a time in the day where you're at your mental best peak. Like you're just firing on all cylinders. And so for most people, you have about 2 to 4 hours of a window in the day where problems might feel a little bit more fun, like they're more of a challenge than a hindrance. And so they're not obstacles. And so you need to realize that. Start paying attention to where your energy is flowing in your day-to-day, where it dips and stuff, and start to realize what is working for me. When am I like hitting everything on all cylinders? And for me, it changes based on different life cycle type stuff, right? For when I was, when it was just me and my wife, it was, late at night. And now that I have kids, maybe it's like waking up in the morning and getting it done before everybody wakes up. It changes based on how things go throughout life. And that's why I gave you that perspective about how things change throughout life, because it is always a moving target. What you think works for you now cannot be extrapolated out into the future, but you can think about it ahead of time and prepare for it. And so, a lot of you know, because you're in my class, I live over 100 miles away from campus, and I'm here, and so I know why I'm here because of you guys. I know why I'm at home because of my family, because both my family, my parents and my wife's parents, and my brother and his family, and my brother-in-law and his family are within basically a 15-mile radius of where I live, and so it's much easier for my kids to be around them than for them to travel from somewhere here to go see them. And so I know what it's like to get up at 4:40 and drive to work, but I know why I do it, and I manage my energy accordingly. And there are so many things that you can do. You don't think about it, but when you're in the car for a couple of hours at a time, you can learn so many things. Find a good podcast. You can listen to some good music you haven't listened to since high school. There are so many things that you can use with your time that you might not think of, but once you start getting into it, you start to realize, how am I using my energy and what can I do with it? So when you realize what your Einstein window is, you've got to protect it. And so that can be used to tackle the 20% of your work that produces 80% of your outcomes. And then let's get to something that perhaps if you're a student, you might not find it fun, but I know that some have realized this. Like, I batch my emails. So essentially, I only answer maybe once or twice a day. And so with task batching, here you're saving a lot of time, effort, and energy, because you're grouping similar, often less difficult type stuff together. And so similar tasks require similar skills, so you can group them together, and you start to notice patterns that you might not notice elsewhere. So when students are emailing me because, I hate Moodle, they're emailing me that, the Moodle deadlines aren't matching up. You can start to notice that pattern when you're batching stuff, right? Because it's obvious in the emails that students are sending. And I can have the same reply, because Duke's telling me that the Moodle quizzes dates are wrong. I'll be like, oh, Jessica's telling me the same thing. Duke, thank you for letting me know. Jessica, thank you for, just copy and paste it, right? And so if you group similar tasks together, then it minimizes your switching between tasks. And we know, well, perhaps not everybody knows, but if you dig into some of the stuff about productivity, multitasking can really not be that efficient or that effective. It can be for low-hanging fruit, stuff that is very quickly done. For instance, I might print something from the printer and then go cut up some paper that I need for a class activity. That's decent multitasking. But the idea, I'm going to watch TV while I'm juggling, vacuuming, and writing a paper, not the best use of multitasking, right? So task batching is the solution. Focus on the things that are similarly related, group them together, and just get them out of the way all at once, so that you're not responding, you're not picking up your phone and looking at your iPhone's screen time, and it says 3,000 pickups today, because you're responding to emails or whatever it is. The next way that you could use to manage your time, and we're going to go over 3 or 4 different ways to batch time, and you can use all of them. There's not one method that fits for everything. The Pomodoro technique, Italian, so it's essentially, you decide what task to be done, you set a timer for 25 minutes, you work on it until the timer rings, you take a short break, and then you start over again. And so what this ends up being is, how many of you procrastinate? So if you're procrastinating, essentially there are a lot of things that probably lead you to do that. It's the fear of that big thing you have to accomplish. Here, you're forcing yourself to at least get started. Once you get started, then you start to realize perhaps I should just start an outline. And you spend 25 minutes with the outline, boom, I've got everything I need. And here's the beauty of it. Like, I know what I want to include, and I'm a perfectionist, and I think all of it should be included. But if I were to give this to Jessica, or if I were to give this to Emma, they don't know what was in my head, right? And so as long as it makes sense, like, you can leave some of your original plans out. And this is something I learned from being an artist, right? When you produce artwork that people think is really cool, you start to realize you can impress them even though you had a different objective or a different vision about how it would play out, and you're kind of defeated, or you don't feel good about the outcome because you have this grander vision. But people look at it and they say, that's pretty cool. And so you can use the Pomodoro technique essentially to start planning that stuff out and realizing, a done dissertation is the best dissertation, is what I learned when I was in my PhD program. And so you get it started, and then you can use that next 25-minute interval after that 5-minute break to start fine-tuning some things. You've got the outline, or you can move to something completely different, but you keep cycling through these tasks and making improvements on things, and then over time, you become a lot more productive with that. Another way that you could do this is essentially attention management, whereas the Pomodoro technique, we're blocking off time, we're set time. I don't know, what's coming to mind is you gave us an assignment with Andrew Fultz. We were working together.
I don't know.
And we were behind the gun. And without knowing it, we did that, the Pomodoro technique. I just set a timer and said, Andrew, write it. And I just kept like telling him what to do, and then I would take that stuff and I would like edit it and revise it and expand upon it. And so we essentially took what had been a project that was like making us very stressed, and we knocked it out within, a couple of hours, and it no longer became a stressor. So another way, that was an off tangent type of thing, but another way that you can manage your time is attention management, whereas essentially you're saying, Sam, my time with you is important. I'm going to block off, my whole afternoon to tackle whatever we need to get done. And so we're going to get you have my attention, we're going to get this done. And so because you've freed up your time, because you've been using the Pareto principle with the Eisenhower matrix, plus all those other techniques to essentially gain your time, now you can start building these large chunks that you might want to devote to time with your family. So my time with you is important. Going back to the lifespan aspect, where we know that our time is limited with certain people in our life, we can change that by being intentional with how we spend our time, and we can do that through attention management, whereas essentially we're realizing, I'm going to spend this time with you, and I talked about how the 2-hour drive, when you have that, you can call someone up and you can spend that time talking on the phone. Again, there are so many ways that you can go about using your time and managing your attention, managing your effort, because the implications of all this stuff for time management is essentially be here, be present, wherever you are, be there. So we're going to wrap up in just a second. One thing I want you to remember from this is essentially the idea of relationships. We're all embedded in relationships with everybody that we're around. And so oftentimes there's a structural aspect to that. Does anyone know who William Dawes is? Anyone know who Paul Revere is? Okay, so let's get at the structural aspect of relationships. Both Dawes and Revere rode on the horseback in Boston on that fateful night in April, both sounded the alarm that the Revolutionary War had begun. Dawes rode south while Revere rode north. The towns they went through were demographically similar. Both men came from the same social class, similar educational backgrounds, but only Revere's name became famous. And what largely accounted for the difference is social network. And so he was an informational broker and a structural whole. And so if you know anything about social network research, an information broker goes in between different groups, subgroup A, subgroup B, and bridges a structural whole between weak and strong ties. And so he brings information to other people. With strong ties, these are the people that are your close-knit in your everyday, day-to-day routine. So they know what's going on, just like you know what's going on. You know if you're going to a fraternity event, that they're going to be there. So they have a similar routine, they have a similar expectations. Whereas someone has a weak tie, someone that you maybe went to high school with, they have a whole different expectations, different routine. And so weak ties actually become very strong for certain outcomes that you want, because they have novelty, they have opportunities, they have a whole rhyme and reason that you're not aware of. And so when you start running with people that aren't in your social network, but they know you and they like you, then you start spreading information, and that's where you get the job promotion, that's where you get the new information. And so with that is something that I really want to emphasize, because we'll come to a close. We'll talk about the implications for business in just a second. But essentially, with finding mentors, this is something that I found extremely beneficial for me. So I was born hydrocephalic, which, if you know Latin, that means water on the brain. And what that means is that I have a shunt. It looks like a little soap dispenser that takes fluid that's built up on my brain and redirects it to my stomach. And so I have an incision right here, an incision right here, and from that, I had to get brain surgeries at different points in my life. When I was 5 years old, when I was in second grade, I want to say in sixth grade, and you shave your head, you come in hunched over because you have incision points everywhere. You start to notice people are kind of looking at you funny. And one of the things that I learned from that, essentially, build up a tough skin. But also, in seventh grade, guys, I'm a solid A- student. I didn't try that hard. I got mostly A's, a few B's. But when I got out for what ended to be a botched surgery, so I had to go back a second time and spend 2 weeks out of school and come back. I think I got a D in Spanish and English, which is very bad for my language skills. So obviously, it's the first time I got a D, and I realized something right then and there. Right, this could have been prevented if I had the right mentors and sought that out. So what I learned from that is seek out mentors, and don't wait for them to find you. Know what you want from people and what you can offer people. Know what type of personality fits well with yours, and then connect with these people. Ask for advice, and if you find out that it works really well, my advice for choosing mentors is because I have the benefit of having a lot of them, is you want to choose someone who is willing to be vulnerable, so they share their experience with you. Obviously, they would have some element of expertise that you're looking for. That they're consistent, so they're always showing up in a way that you can benefit from, because you know what to expect from them. And most importantly, that you like them. So if you're spending this time with, see up here, Dr. Hayward's right here, he's in the room, right? If you're spending time with these people, that you're learning from them, and you're building a relationship. And so not only can you benefit from them, but you can add back to other people's lives. And so we'll just we did this with a lot of you in my class, but the essential takeaway here is like too often in different relationships, we can request and help others, and the benefit in anything you do in any type of work is to be the giver requester. The people who are well regarded and most productive because they ask for help and they give help. And so again, that idea that you're embedded in a social network, it matters. And finally, we talk about money. Benjamin Franklin says money makes money, and that money makes more money. And so that's really beneficial when we talk about business. The same things apply. And I want you to focus on this. So if you're an entrepreneur, look at the business model canvas. This is the number one thing that I could give you to make sure that you're on the right track, because all these things need to work together, and if you find a way to make them all work, then you have something that potentially can scale. And so there's a difference between scaling and leveraging. You can leverage your time, you can leverage your products, you can leverage your groups, you can license things, but you can create systems, market, you can create scale and all these other things. And so you need the steps to scale. So the key takeaway here, if you're an entrepreneur and you want that life-work balance, is that you need to remove yourself from your business. And your business needs to work even when you're not there. So it needs to make money when you're not there. And so you need to automate things. You need to delegate things. You need to make sure that the people who are showing up to work have decision-making authority, and that they are the right people to make those type of decisions, and that they're paid well, they know that they're valued, so that you can essentially take that 4-week, 3-week vacation, come back, and be depressed because your business works without you. What are you supposed to be doing with your time? Spending it with your family, of course, spending it with your friends, doing things like that. All that stuff comes from those things we're talking about. Systematically playing the game, figuring out what works and what doesn't work. The Pareto principle, the Eisenhower matrix, the Pomodoro technique, all that stuff you can use to your advantage to figure out what works for you, the Einstein window. How do you use that stuff to buy back your time so that you can make the most of it? So I appreciate your time. I know we went a little bit over. I hope it was helpful, and good luck with the rest of the semester.
If you guys